Welcome to Inspector Josh Investigates TV, where we reverse engineer TV shows so you can draw story lessons and make better stories faster. I'm Josh Paulson, a multimedia writer and story coach, and today we have a special guest, Emily Gaiman.
Hey!
How you doing, Emily?
I'm great. How are you, Josh?
Doing awesome. What are we going to be looking at today?
So today we're looking at my favorite episode of Downton Abbey, the whole series, season 2's finale, which I think is episode 9. It's like the Christmas episode.
Yeah, it looks like that's right.
Yes. And spoiler alert, if you don't want to know how season 2 ends, stop listening.
Emily Gaiman is a storytelling coach by day, a freelance writer by night, and a follower of Jesus at all hours. As a storytelling coach and now as a podcaster too, she helps you realize you have a story and coaches you through the writing and editing process to share it. Emily is a story junkie, coffee enthusiast, Special Olympics coach, and aunt to 8 amazing humans. Connect with Emily at emilygaiman.com, on social at Emily Gaiman, and catch her on the Your Stories podcast at Solid State Radio and iTunes. It's so great to have you, Emily.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, what do you like about Downton Abbey, and how did you get into it?
All right, well, I had a friend who was into it before I was, and he was like, "You've got to watch Downton Abbey," and I'm like, "Okay." I didn't really know much about it, and so I watched the first episode being kind of like, everybody's all about Downton Abbey, but whatever, and so then I watched the first episode, and in the very first episode, I did not realize, like, what the whole thing was about at all. The first episode opens with the sinking of the Titanic. And then the whole story takes off after that. And I'm like, oh, this is a historical fiction piece. And I'm like all over historical fiction. Like, I don't really love history. Like, I do. I love parts of history. I'm not like a history buff, but I love historical fiction and I love reading it and I love watching it. Like, some of my favorite movies are historical fiction movies. I don't know. I love the different time periods and how they pull it off, but then how they retell history in such compelling ways. So then I got into it, and I think I watched the whole first season in like 2 or 3 days after work 1 week.
That's like 9 hours, right?
Yeah, well, probably
not
more than 9 hours.
Specific time on it for you, but
not to put too fine of a point on it, but yes, it's about 10 hours of my life I'll never get back. Yeah.
Probably everybody who's listening right now has done that before, so
yeah,
I don't think anyone's throwing stones here.
True. So I honestly have not ever watched. That's not true. I have binge watched one other show, but that was because I was sick for an entire weekend. But any other show I haven't watched like I've watched Downton Abbey. So then I became a Downton Abbey follower, and I love the stories. There's so many storylines, and they build the characters so well, and it's just really fun. So I actually, because of the science of storytelling, which is a completely different episode of storytelling, I actually started dreaming about the characters in Downton Abbey. The more
I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah, like the more time I spent watching the show, I felt like I had a relationship with these characters. And that happens because of the science of storytelling. Like, our brains form relationships with characters because we interpret stories, like we process stories differently than regular data. So anyways, I was dreaming about the characters and like what they would do in the story. Like, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? What if so-and-so dies? Like, it was so crazy. It was weird. So
I've had dreams about characters, and I mean, for me growing up, it was a lot of cartoons and video games. So that was a lot of my growing up. And so I would have dreams about them all the time, or in some cases I would die in them too, which maybe that's because in video games you can die a lot, but
True.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely can relate with that.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely am a Downton Abbey follower, and after 6 seasons, I was not ready for it to end, but all good things must come to an end, so yeah.
Yeah, when that show ends that you've just been following and you're like, this is an important part of my life right now. Like,
yeah, like,
sure,
I don't get to see all these friends now. Yeah. Where did they go? Like, I lost a whole part of my life.
Yeah. So today we're looking at the QC method for building tension, which stands for question and counter evidence. So first you set up a question. Will they get engaged? Will they save the day? Will they conquer their fear? And then you provide evidence for both sides, the easiest in demonstrating either a yes answer or a no answer. So will they get engaged? Yes, here's why. No, here's why not. Yes, here's why. No, here's why not. And so basically we're thrown back and forth with this series of questions, and that can just be a lot of fun, and it's interesting. It creates an enjoyable story that can kind of pull you along and keep you guessing. And on the one hand, yeah, because of tropes and all that, we have a pretty good guess at how it's going to end, but it's still fun to be along that journey. Yeah, like, you know what the answer is going to be. You know the outcome, or else, like, the story. You've never seen a movie before.
Right, like, if you've never seen the movie, even though you've never, like, any movie, even though you've never seen this movie before, you know that this particular character can't die. At least they can't die yet. Like, maybe they don't die in the end, but it's way too soon for them to die. But you're still, like, engaged with the story and being like, oh my gosh, they're gonna fall off this cliff, or, you know, like, what comes to mind is, like, the James Bond movies. Everybody knows James Bond never dies. Sorry for the spoiler alert, but James Bond, I know, shocker. James Bond never dies, but every single scene, he's like either being threatened by the villain or he's running on top of a train, which is pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I've never done it, but I've heard that's not a good idea.
I know, it's not wise. So, like, you know the answer to this question, but you're still engaged in the story because it's exciting. And what's the answer going to be? I don't know, but I do know. It's weird. Yeah.
So let's jump into how this is demonstrated in Downton Abbey. So how is it demonstrated in Downton Abbey?
Okay, so the entire story of Downton Abbey is precariously perched on one question, and that it kind of all rolls off from there. So I already mentioned that the beginning of Downton Abbey starts with the sinking of the Titanic. So Downton Abbey is run by this Earl. The Earl owns all of this property, and he has to protect his property, you know, in an age where there was inheritances and only boys could take on inheritances. Girls couldn't, like, take the inheritance of their father and all that mess. So this is the type of era that we're in, and the prosperity of the family and then this property is all tied into the heir to the family's money, right? Okay, so the reason why the sinking of the Titanic is a problem is because the heir to the Downton line dies in the Titanic. He's on the Titanic. So this is the first episode of the entire show, right? Yeah, so what's going to happen to this whole family when the heir dies in such a tragedy? So that's how the show opens. By the end of the first season, we have an heir that they've kind of dug up from, like, the family tree. And it doesn't go so well because, like I said, this is an era where girls don't get any inheritance, only men do. So the idea is for the heir to come in and marry the firstborn daughter. Well, the firstborn daughter is a bit of a spitfire, and she's mad because it's the 1910s and, well, 1912. And how come at this point in culture, women can't, you know, take on the family line and all this stuff? So she's kind of a spitfire. The heir comes in and he's like, I don't want to be fancy. I just want to be a normal person. And I don't want to marry this whoever they're going to make me marry kind of guy. So then seasons 1 and 2 go through this whole mess of, are they going to get engaged? Because the entire family and the family inheritance lies in this question. The whole thing is predicated on, will they get married? So this goes, as any love story does, it goes up and down and up and down. So at first, like, neither of them are attracted to each other. They don't even like each other. They are like, this is not happening. Like, nobody's telling me who to get married to and all that stuff. But the audience knows that Matthew and Mary are perfect for each other, and they've got to hang on. They've got to end up together because it just makes perfect sense. But countless barriers come up. Then he's interested, but she's not. And then she's interested, but he's not. And then, like, the really weird part, her mom gets pregnant. And so then, like, what if her mom is pregnant with a boy? Well, then Matthew doesn't get any money because now there is a direct heir. And so Mary's like, I don't really want you anymore if you're not rich, right? So then Matthew's like, well, fine, blah, blah, blah. So then he goes off to war. They're still in love with each other. You know, like you kind of know that they still are in love with each other, but he's off at war. He finds this girl that he's going to marry while he's off at war, which would be World War I, which is part of the historical piece, which is so cool. And while he's away, Mary falls back in love with him, but he's got this other girl. And then they come back. Mary's single and Matthew is engaged. Well, long story short, this is kind of getting longer than shorter. But Matthew's fiance dies from Spanish fever. He thinks that they killed her because of a broken heart, that she gave up because they really knew that she really knew that they loved each other. And so she dies. Mary gets engaged to this newspaper mogul who's a jerk, to put it kindly. And there's like all of these questions, right? Like, yes, they're going to get married. Oh, no, he's gotten engaged. Oh, she's gotten engaged. Like, oh, man, it's a mess. So then at the very end of season 2, he, like I said, he's convinced that they shouldn't get married because they both deserve to be unhappy because they broke his fiance's heart. And that's why she died. So then Mary decides that she's not going to marry this jerk of a newspaper guy because he's a jerk. And then it's like, okay, good. They've both decided that they're going to break ties with the previous relationships. Matthew thinks, all right, it's okay. My fiance's dead. And Mary's like, I'm not going to marry this jerk. I'm just going to be single if that's what it has to be like, right? And it finally is like, yes, they're going to get married. And then at the very end, she reveals this secret. Mary reveals this secret that the audience has known from the beginning of the series. But she reveals this secret that Matthew's not ready to hear. And that she's had this like weird affair and it didn't end well. And so then Matthew is stunned with this news, like, oh my goodness, should I marry her now? Like, and right? So then after all of these ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, he finally is like, I don't care about your past. I have decided that, you know, my fiance, her name was Lavinia. Lavinia wants us to be happy. So please marry me. And like this is the very last scene, like the very last scene. And the entire audience were all like, just take this collective deep breath and sigh because we've been waiting for 2 seasons and like 20 episodes to get to this finally saying yes to this big question that we all knew was coming. We just didn't know when it was coming. So that was longer than I thought it was going to take for me to explain that to you.
That's all right. It's a complicated show. Like
it is. It's such a complicated show.
But there's the yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Yep, they get engaged. No, they're not. Yes, here's why not. Here's why. Here's why not. Here's why. They're perfect for each other. But now he's engaged. But now she's... Well, she wasn't engaged, but she was dating the one guy.
Yeah.
Right? So, whatever. Relationship, no relationship. Available, not available. Don't like each other, like each other.
Right.
Scared to be together. Whatever. Like, all the different things that just keep stockpiling until it's just like... I don't know what to do. They need to get together and... Yeah, so you have the
like,
yes,
you can
no,
just
yes,
hear,
no, yes, no.
Right, you can just hear, like, everybody watching at the same moment going, like, finally!
It's happening!
Yes! And part of you is like, because you've gone through all of these ups and downs, part of you is like, I don't know if I should trust, like, I don't trust you.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Like, I don't trust you. No. Yeah, the writer is Julian Fellows. And at some point, there were actually several points in the story where I was like, I don't trust you, Julian Fellows. I'm not gonna get my hopes up because you just crush my dreams every single week. So, anyways. Yeah.
I know that makes sense. When you stop trusting the writer, it's not that, like, yeah.
But that means he's a good writer because he's always keeping you together, right? Like, not together, but he's keeping you interested in what's going to happen next. So he's a brilliant writer. I just don't like him.
I guess that's fair enough.
Yeah.
So let's look at a way that we can implement this. Do you want me to run through this?
Sure.
Okay. So let's say that Susie's true love, Bob, was convicted of murder and he didn't do it. And Susie needs to find evidence that Bob wasn't a murderer. So our question then is, can Susie find evidence that her true love, Bob, was not in fact a murderer? So let's run through. So that's our question. So now let's evidence, counter evidence this up. So evidence. She finds fingerprints at the scene. But counter evidence, they're Bob's fingerprints.
Not looking good for Bob.
Yeah, no. Then evidence. She finds a knife with initials. Oh, great. But counter evidence. The knife's initials are Bob's old alias. And then we have more evidence. She finds a recording of two people talking about the murder with very distinct voices. But the downside is that one of the people identified in the recording is actually Bob, just altering his voice. And so, but then we could wrap this up by having a piece of evidence where Bob was actually part of a play and that was just a scene and the director set everything up to fake a murder. I doubt that's the most effective way to fake a murder, but, or not to fake a murder, but to, you know what I mean, to make it look like Bob was the murderer.
Right.
But hey, we'll Scooby-Doo this up a little bit and just go with it.
Yeah.
So that's a way that, so the idea is that you keep the audience in suspense and asking questions. So that's where this can be fun with a kind of mystery setup, is that you have the evidence pointing in different directions. And that's how most mysteries really work. And really, Downton Abbey, like, calling it a mystery doesn't seem accurate because we don't have questions about whether or not they'll get together in the end. But it's kind of treated that way because you're given this evidence, counter evidence. I mean, in most mysteries, it doesn't follow such common tropes where it's like the butler doesn't always do it. So you can't trust on tropes to tell you exactly what will happen in those kinds of stories, but kind of still follows the same structure, seems like.
Yeah. Yeah, and like there's that conflict, there's that conflict that keeps the audience interested because we've all been in a situation where we're not sure how it's going to end up, right? Yeah. Even if it's just like as simple as taking a class, right? Like at the beginning of the semester, you've got all of these things that you have to do before you get the grade, pass the class. And as it gets closer, you've answered many of those questions. Yeah. But then at the end, you're still like, am I going to pass this class? Yeah. Or it could be as complicated as like buying a house. And so then you've got an offer and then you've got a counter offer. And will they accept that? And then then there's the inspection and the appraisal. Yeah. And so then all these big questions for these big things in our lives that produce conflict and tension in our lives, and making characters have those types of natural conflicts and those natural tensions is, I think, the work of a skilled writer, and makes the character more relatable to the audience.
Yeah, and like, I mean, it's interesting because with Downton Abbey, like, a lot of the questions are kind of big questions, a lot of the evidence is kind of big, where it's like, oh, they're engaged or things like that. But you can also stockpile a lot of smaller things, and those can build up to enough reason or tension even. Like, like kind of, okay, well, there's like some of the problems I'm sure in Downton Abbey seem like a much bigger deal than others. Some of them it's kind of like, okay, well, they don't like each other. This can be worked out. Oh, he's engaged. That's kind of a big deal.
Right.
Okay. Yes. Like you kind of have it's not just that, oh, how big is the biggest piece? It's the combination of them all. It's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, although maybe it's more like rocks or bricks, depending on your story.
Right.
And with that, I'd say it's safe to say,
case closed.
Thanks so much for listening. Where can we reach you, Emily?
So I have my website, pretty simple, emilygaiman.com, or find me on Facebook at Emily Gaiman Storytelling Coach, and on other social media at Emily Gaiman. And I also have a podcast called Your Stories that airs on solidstateradio.net on Saturdays at 12 noon and Sundays at 9 a.m. And eventually will be on iTunes.
That's awesome. What's your podcast about?
My podcast is just sharing stories of people that I know, and my goal of the podcast is to help people realize that they actually do have a story and it matters. Because when I tell people I'm a storytelling coach, a lot of people say, wow, that's really cool, but I don't have a story. And so I want to share stories of normal people who some of them don't think they have a story either. But when we hear each other's stories, we can connect with each other on a different level. And then we can also see how we do have stories, and how they are powerful. So I believe in stories and the power of stories, and I want the Your Stories podcast to help listeners to see that they have a story and it matters.
And I've listened to a few of the episodes, and I recommend you check it out too, because it is a lot of fun. So you can reach me at Josh Paulison. Go to my website, joshpaulison.com, and you'll get a ton more free story creation resources. And you can also contact me for workshops, whatever other cool stuff that you want done in your area. And I guess that is goodbye. Have a great month, everybody, and take care.
See ya.